So Sag Harbor came out 2 years ago. I was really glad that people in Sag Harbor seem to like it. And the premise is that it's 1985, and there are some kids who grew up in New York City, and they go out to Sag Harbor, Long Island in the summer. Their parents only come out on weekends because they're working, and so Monday through Friday they're sort of left to their own devices. Luckily for them, they're sort of dorks, so they don't get into too much trouble. And that's it. Pretty much. I didn't want to make it too interesting, so I left all the exciting stuff out of the book. Usually when you read a coming-of-age tale, like, something will happen where like, they find a dead body in the woods, or some gold doubloons, or like, there are two kids standing on a branch, and then one kid falls off and dies, and the other kid has to come to a separate piece about it, whatever that book is called. So there's like incidents and action. But in my personal experience, I never found a dead body. I wanted to. I was never like chased by the KKK, and it seemed like we grow by degrees as people. So over the course of a summer, we don't have these huge spikes. We just grow, we get 0.001% smarter at the end of the summer. So I wanted to narrate that. And here is an incident in the life of Benji in the spring of '85. He's a good kid. He's never stolen anything. So he's thinking about the one time he did sort of try to move outside his box. And it's the great Coca-Cola robbery. He's in an unlikely occasion, he's been invited to a party by his friend Bobby, who goes to a school in Westchester. The party was a few blocks away from my house on 98th off West End Avenue. Bobby went to a prep school in Riverdale that had a mix of city kids and Westchester kids. I met up with him in front of the McDonald's outside the subway. Karen's parents fly away every weekend, he told me, so she has a lot of parties. I pictured weekend after weekend of parties, Friday to Sunday bacchanals, where kids smoked weed and drank beer in full kid with the empty house liberation. A notion reinforced when we walked in and saw everyone lounging on couches or leaning against the walls in mellow affect. It seemed like they'd been there for days in a perfect habitat of cool poise. Bobby introduced me around, and I was greeted with genuine, non-judgmental interest. New York private schools all drew from the same pool of well-scrubbed scion. But these people seemed nicer than the reliably dismissive brand in my school. Like, they'd make space for my tray and scooch over if I walked by their lunch table, or make fun of my clothes in a way that said, "We're close enough that my joking revealed our human connection," as opposed to, "You're a jerk and I'm an asshole." I thought to myself, I could get used to this. I went to look for a beer, and there I stumbled upon the Fort Knox of carbonated beverages. A few weeks earlier, the Coca-Cola Company had discontinued their signature cola. They'd lost market share to Pepsi. Diet Coke, the sister brand, had been too successful, luring away consumers with the promise of thinner thighs, a figure more in line with that aerobicized you. The higher-ups hit upon a catastrophic solution. They decided to replace the most famous drink in the world with an imposter. I've been addicted to Coke for years, with a 2 or 3 can a day habit since the 5th grade. When my sister told me not to be so hyper, or my parents told me to knock it off, I vibrated with the strain of keeping still, and wondered why nature had cursed me so. It wasn't until I was in high school that I learned what caffeine was. My love for Coke went beyond mere buzz, though. How could one not be charmed by the effervescent joviality of a tall glass of the stuff? The manic activity of the bubbles popping, reforming, popping anew, sliding up the inside of the glass to freedom, as if the beverage were, miraculously, caffeinated on itself. That tart first sip, preferably with ice knocking against the lips for an added sensory flourish, that stunned the brain into total recall of pleasure, all the Cokes consumed before, and all those impending Cokes, the long line of satisfaction underpinning a life. What forgiveness for the supreme disappointment of a fountain Coke that had turned out to be fizzless and dead, or lukewarm Coke that had been sitting out for a while, falling away from its ideal temperature of 46.5 degrees Fahrenheit / 8 degrees Celsius. All the bubbles fled, so that it had become a useless mud of sugar, which is what new Coke tasted like, actually. I remember when I first heard that they were changing the formula, April 23rd, 1985. It was dinner time, and I wandered into the living room to ask my mother a question. I can't remember what it was, as it was erased by the terrible information. Dinner time custom had my brother and I eating in his room before an array of sitcoms, the MASHs, the KRPs, while our parents ate in the living room watching the evening news. I walked in just in time to hear the newscaster say, "A surprising announcement about an American classic." And somehow I knew. I stayed through the commercial break and watched as Roberto Gozzietta, the CEO of Coca-Cola, cheered on the end of the world. It was inconceivable, like tampering with the laws of nature. Hey, let's try gravity-free Tuesdays. Buckle up, motherfuckers. From this day on, water is incredibly flammable. Let's see how that goes. I slunk back to my room, dizzy and confused. It was as if someone had popped the top of the world and let all the air out. Within days, I cornered the local market on Old Coke in a grid defined by 106 to the north, 96 to the south, and from Amsterdam to the river, buying up what I could from the corner bodegas, the increasingly slick delis popping up on Broadway, and the assorted stationery stores of the hood. By the time new Coke started to appear, a few days after the announcement, I was well prepared with a huge stash in my closet, a prayer against doomsday. I had no dreams of profiteering, of selling my stock at a dear price to aficionados when the day came that the people of Earth discovered the treasure they had destroyed. As if the cola were an exquisite lizard or spiny bivalve, driven to extinction in our race's savage drive to ruin. No, I wanted it all to myself, like an art thief who steals nude descending a staircase, or some key Picasso, and hangs it on the wall of his own private gallery for his wicked and ingrown pleasure, at peace with the fact that the world is unaware of his activities, and perhaps that's actually the point of the entire exercise. Although such a sentiment is probably not too surprising, coming from a boy whose main recreation was masturbation. When I finished scurrying up and down the avenues and hauled my six-packs back to my lair, it had seemed as though I had enough Coke for a lifetime. But of course it went fast. I tried rationing myself to 1 can a day, but that didn't last long. I couldn't keep my hands off the stuff. And my parents had a party. My mother asked if she could borrow a few cans for mixers. Borrow? How'd she even know about my stash? If she knew that, what else did she know? There were some magazines in my possession. I should maybe hide better. What could I say but yes, since she could not see or just plain ignored the desperation in my eyes? What a horror it was to see all those half-finished cans strewn around the house. It was a battlefield, mine own Gettysburg. And I learned that day what it is to mourn as I heard the sad, exhausted hissing as I poured the remains down the sink. I was susceptible then when I went into Karen's kitchen and someone opened the cabinet next to the sink and I saw a flash of red. As if in a dream, I knelt down to see, and there it was, 6-pack upon 6-pack of sweet brown gold. I was astounded. Yes, there was more Coke in the world, but more important, there were others out there like me. Those who had been disappointed by life, but who did what they could to beat back chaos. I drifted away from the kitchen and let this revelation settle in. As I hung out with Bobby's friends and talked and joked with them, my dream of being adopted by their clan faded away. The cans kept returning to my vision, like a red curtain falling down to hide the world. After 2 beers, I knew what I had to do. I never had 2 beers before. I retrieved my jacket from Karen's parents' bedroom, which had been commandeered as the coat room, and slipped back to the kitchen. A boy and a girl talked closely together next to the fridge. I tossed some ice into a glass, loudly and emphatically, and declared, "Just looking for mixers," and they smiled and moved away. Obscured by the cabinet door, I wrapped a six-pack in my jacket and pulled the next six-pack forward so that it appeared as if nothing were amiss. My crime might not be noticed for days. I stood. No one noticed me. I walked very act-naturally out into the living room. My plan was to stash the goods in a safe area in the coat room and exit calmly with the stuff at the end of the party. The living room was quiet. The talking room, as opposed to the dancing room, Karen's bedroom, where the music was cranked up. Which is what made the crash that much more loud. In my nervousness, I clumsily wrapped the six-pack, and when I adjusted it as I walked across the room, the can slipped out in the slow motion that is the speed of humiliation. They clattered against the hardwood floors. Everyone looked over, but my crime was so inexplicable that outsiders could not comprehend what had just happened. All of them except for Karen. She looked into they returned to the conversation as I picked up the six-pack. All of them except for Karen. She looked into my eyes, shook her head ever so slightly in sad assessment. She took the coat from my hands and said, "I think you should go now."